I want to bring in my guest now in studio. I'm joined by Avi Melamed, founder of Inside the Middle East Institute and Middle East expert. Thank you so much for joining me. Sure. Avi, I want to follow up on something that Jonathan just said, the importance of if we are going to completely eradicate, eliminate Hamas, we're going to have to target their tunnels, which we know are using human shields, specifically those of the hospital. The international repercussions of something like this is going to be exponential.
Yes, definitely, and I would add something else into that. We have to take into consideration that Hamas is deliberately trapping those tunnels, and particularly under those facilities, including the hospitals. We have to take into consideration the possibility that Hamas will deliberately detonate those places, exactly for that same reason that you just mentioned right now.
So, and then, by doing that, would we see, do you think, a similar situation of Hamas then trying to point the finger and the blame on Israel?
Of course.
I think the international perspective as we continue to look into this is definitely putting a fog, at least on the international media. We saw it even with the United Nations Security Council and what Antonio Guterres had to say. But I want to focus actually quickly on something that the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, said earlier today, speaking about how Iran is continuing to support Hamas and that they supported Hamas since the onset of this war.
Iran is supporting Hamas for the last 40 years.
And this goes against what Iran said, that they had no hand in this attack.
The Iranian regime, of course, is a brutal, murderous regime. He butchered his own people. If somebody wants to believe that regime, this is, is welcome to do that. We all know what's the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime is advancing a very dangerous, vicious master plan to become the superpower in the Middle East. And among that master plan is the whole plan to eliminate the state of Israel. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are a very significant component in the Iranian master plan because they enable the Iranian master plan the Iranian regime to continue and to fuel the flames of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because this is one of the major tickets that the Iranian regime is playing, marketing itself to the Arab world, saying, we, the Iranian regime, we will free Palestine. They couldn't care less about Palestinians, but as long as there is continuation of the fight between Israel and Gaza Strip, and Hamas and Islamic Jihad are serving that purpose, that serves the Iranian regime, that serves their interest. And we just saw how the Iranian regime is coordinating, orchestrating the attacks on different directions of its proxies. We saw it in Yemen, we saw it in Syria, we saw it in Iraq, we see it in Gaza Strip, and we saw it in Lebanon. The Iranian regime master plan presents a serious threat to the state of Israel, a serious threat to the region, and a serious threat to the world.
And we continue to see these different Iranian proxies come together. Just today, a new picture released of Hezbollah chief, Hamas, and the Palestinian and Islamic Jihad. Now, Hassan Nasrallah also releasing his first statement since the start of this war 19 days ago. It's pretty significant that he waited so long to even come out with a public statement.
I'll tell you what I think happened in this meeting. Ziad Nakhaleh, the leader of Islamic Jihad, and Salah al-Arouri, the leader, one of the major leaders of Hamas, went to this room, and they have a desire actually to make sure that Hezbollah is going to join the war. Basically, they said it in a polite manner, hoping that Nasrallah will say, yes, we are going to join the war. I'm not so sure that Nasrallah gives such a decisive answer. I think that Nasrallah gave some sort of like an evasive answer, because it goes back, Nicole, to something that we spoke about a couple of days ago, and that is the Iranian regime regarding the question, dilemma, regarding the question, am I going to order Hezbollah to enter the war and then jeopardize not only the downfall of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which will be a major blow to the Iranian regime, but also jeopardize my most significant proxy, this is the Hezbollah in Lebanon, or am I going to let go and basically give up my base in Gaza Strip? There is another significant component in this meeting which we have to understand. One of the things that the Iranians, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Nasrallah, and others are basically marketing to the Arab world is the concept that is called unifying the arenas. In other words, what they say all the time was, once there will be a war against Gaza Strip, all the proxies will come together, Hezbollah and the Iranian-backed Iraqi Shiite militias and so to support, to save Gaza Strip. There is already by now, and for a long period of time, there are voices within Hamas and Islamic Jihad who are basically questioning Nasrallah, where are you exactly? We are waiting for you to come in to join this war. If the in the end of the day, Hezbollah is not going to enter the war, and if in the end of the day, as it should happen, Hamas is no longer ruling Gaza Strip, Hamas is taken out of the equation, that will be a double major blow to the Iranian regime and the Hezbollah, because they will lose one of the most strategic cards, which is Gaza Strip, and they will lose the remain of their credibility in the Arab world, and particularly within the Palestinians themselves, because right now the Palestinians are furious with Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They are saying to them, you inflicted catastrophe of the people of Gaza in the service of the Iranians and Nasrallah, and in the moment of truth, they failed to show up. If that's going to be the scenario, if Hezbollah is staying out in the end of the day, if Hamas and Islamic Jihad are demolished, destructed by Israel, and they are no longer playing any significant role as a regional player, as a one that could impact the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that will be yet another nail in Hamas' political coffin.
I want to talk now also, we're hearing new reports out of Qatar claiming that they're having a breakthrough possibly with the hostage negotiations. The hostage situation remains one of the most difficult, complicated, and critical points of this, but negotiating with Qatar, it also poses a very difficult threat, and it poses a very difficult question as to the credibility of even working with Qatar in the first place.
Well, we know the Qatari game. The Qataris are playing the game all directions. They are changing their position according to their needs and their political interests. This is part of the legitimate, let's call it, real politic game. We all know that, we are all familiar. But here is something that I think is important to understand in the context of the hostages that Hamas is holding. Hamas is now applying a tactic, a combined tactic that has two major components. One is playing the card of the hostages as a bargaining chip, and the second thing, he is hoping that the scenery is coming from Gaza Strip, resulting in this international reaction to the situation in Gaza Strip. That together will create a situation where Hamas will be able to prolong more and more and more the time Israel will move on to the next swift, decisive military move. And Hamas hopes that by doing that, he will basically evaporate the whole Israeli preparation and Israeli determination to go into Gaza Strip and to eliminate its rule once and for all. So what we see here is a very sophisticated, vicious play by Hamas. He's not going to release all the hostages as one. He will try to keep them as much as possible. He will release here a group and maybe there a group. The answer for that should be very simple. Any moment that your Hamas is not releasing hostages, another part of Gaza Strip is destroyed, and together with that, the remains of your rule in Gaza Strip. So it's a game of nervous, so to speaking, of between the sides. But I think that Hamas has to be aware of this major stick, that the stick is continuing to blow him, and unless he is going to release all the hostages, he is going to be in a much more dire situation. And in the end of the day, as I said, the end goal of all these things should be taking Hamas out of the equation, meaning making sure that Hamas and Islamic Jihad will be not anymore longer players that could impact the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that they will not anymore be able to be playing a role of regional factor.
So in that sense, then, by using Qatar to negotiate for the release of these hostages, does it help in any way? And also, we know that Israel hasn't primarily been involved in these negotiations. So what exactly could they even put on the table to get more hostages out?
The only thing that Israel could put on the table, and by the way, the United States administrations also said it. They say there is no ceasefire talks before all the hostages are free. And that should be the approach. That should be the approach, is saying, this is not about ceasefire. This is about releasing immediately civilians that you have abducted and you are using them as a bargaining chip. The more you are prolonging that, the more you are not releasing those people, the damage and the catastrophe upon you, Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Gaza Strip, is going to be triple and quadruple. That's the way to dialogue with this situation. And that's the way to basically force Hamas to move forward and to end this saga of the hostages. And one more thing in that context, Hamas must be eliminated. Hamas must be eliminated as a ruling power in Gaza Strip, because otherwise the ramifications of not doing that are very bad.
And Israel says that that continues to be their number one priority, especially as we continue to learn about the aftermath of everything that did happen on October 7th. In fact, the Bedouin community in Israel's southern Negev desert is one most impacted by Hamas, as not only are they close to the Gaza Strip, but they rarely have shelters or even warning sirens. Well, now members of one Bedouin community are coming together to find solutions to the burden of war. In a legal village with no formal name, now in mourning. 60 Israeli Bedouins live in this village in the eastern Negev. On October 7th, they were on the front line against Hamas rockets. Traces of the attack are still visible throughout the village. Rocket shrapnel on the ground and cars torn apart by the impact, all bearing witness to the violence. But it's the people who are most affected.
I have 4 cousins who died in front of my eyes. It's a disaster. A rocket fell on the village around 6:30 a.m. We all ran to see what happened, if anyone was hurt. There was only material damage, so we moved away and sat down in a tent, the whole family. Gradually, the people dispersed, and there were just 5 people in the tent. Shortly afterwards, a missile fell on the tent. 4 died, and 1 is still in hospital.
Given the urgency of the situation, the Israeli army provided concrete shelters the day after the war began. But these makeshift shelters aren't reassuring for the local residents.
The situation is bad, as our villages are not officially recognised. The state considers them wastelands. So we don't have any warning sirens, barely any shelters, miserable concrete blocks that were brought in the day after the attack, but it was too late, and many families don't even have this.
Since the beginning of the war, the Bedouin community has suffered at least 19 deaths from Hamas. Some by rockets, others killed at point-blank range during the terrorist incursions of October 7th. A traumatic experience for the entire community.
The majority of casualties in the Bedouin community occurred within 48 hours of the attack. We lost around 20 people. There were many wounded and 7 hostages. We were on the front line. Many of us live below the poverty line, and half of the people live outdoors. These people have no protection. People are traumatized.
Nevertheless, the Bedouins are getting involved. Volunteer initiatives have been set up to help both the Bedouin community and the region's Jewish inhabitants. In Hura, east of Beersheba, an emergency council has been set up. Since the beginning of the war, leading members of the Bedouin community have been meeting twice a week to evaluate the situation and find solutions to the most urgent problems.
We are all meeting here to provide solutions to the lack of shelter unorganized Bedouin volunteers who want to help. What's more, over 60% of the Bedouin community is under the age of 18. So how can we continue to provide them with an education in wartime? We have to set up a remote education system, but half of the children live in unrecognized villages with no access to internet, so Zoom doesn't work.
Initiatives that try to lighten the burden of war for populations still in shock. When people focus on the events of the attack on October 7th, they often forget about the communities, the Bedouin, the Druze, the Arab Israelis, who all live in Israel as well and were also destroyed by the hands of Hamas. Avi, I think it's an important message to also focus on that clearly Hamas is targeting the Jewish people here in Israel, but really they're targeting Israel as a whole. They're targeting anyone who lives here.
Yes, and it goes back to the tactic that is, of course, backed by the Iranians and is deployed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah. The basic idea is to indiscriminately, knowingly, intentionally target Israel's soft bellies, the civilians. So when they are launching thousands of rockets, those rockets are just being launched everywhere. They could hit Jew, they could hit Muslim, they could hit kids, they could hit women, they could hit everything. So this is the tactic. This is a pure terrorizing tactic that is deliberately, knowingly, and intentionally targeting the civilians, the cities, the civilian infrastructure, and so on and so on. And we have to internalize this evil nature of this threat.
And it clearly shows also, back to your point before, they don't care about even people of their own religion. They don't care about the Palestinian people as well. They just care about this terror and this destruction.
You know that in 2006, when Israeli Arabs were killed as an outcome of Hezbollah's attack, the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, announced that those Israeli Arabs who were killed by Hezbollah's missiles, he announced that they are martyrs. And by that, he was basically concluding the story. We have to understand the vicious nature of these terror attacks and the vicious atrocities that they are conducting.
Does it play into the international perspective as well? Many people, when they're looking at this, they're stating, you know, after Hamas gets their hands on, or the Iranian Guard gets their hands on Israel, they're not just going to start at Israel. Their whole goal is to get the entire Western world.
Yes, look, the Iranian regime is a very dangerous regime. It is inspired by this apocalyptic outlook of mankind. So as a first stage, they are basically talking about creating themselves or positioning themselves as the leading superpower in the Middle East. But this is a first phase because they are looking at the world in a revolutionary outlook. And that revolutionary outlook is fueled by apocalyptic narratives regarding how they think people should live their life, and believe me, it's not heaven to be part of. And so we have to understand the West has been appeasing the Iranian regime for too long. I don't know to say whether the West was failing to understand the true nature and threat that this regime is presenting, or maybe the West knew what it is, but basically choose not to confront with the Iranian regime. As right now in the Middle East, we are in a situation where we see the bitter fruits of this appeasement and unwillingness of the West to stand and confront decisively the threat and challenges that the Mullah regime presents. This is a pivotal moment. This is a moment, among many other things, for a paradigm shift in the West regarding the Iranian regime. If this regime is unable to continue its disastrous, murderous master plans, if this regime is unable to continue and to support, finance, armed its proxies across the Middle East, if this regime is unable to continue and to market a rhetoric that calling for the elimination of states, the state of Israel, and the elimination of Jews, the bitter fruits are going to become much more bitter.
And it's definitely just the beginning, and it's this international perspective is something we will continue to keep an eye on. Avi Melamed, founder of Inside the Middle East Institute and Middle East expert, thank you so much for joining us and providing your expertise as always as we continue to look at the latest developments.